The original intention of this game was to create a platformer with different power-ups and defeat multiple different enemies, and the end goal was to collect 3 diamonds. Each time you collected a diamond, the enemies got harder and there were more traps protecting the diamonds. Since this was my first time creating a GDevelop project, I learnt about how sprites worked, how to move characters, how to create moving enemies, and how to add different objects to the environment. I didn't realize at first that I could place objects beyond the initial camera, but I quickly learnt that I could. The most difficult aspect was getting the enemies to face a direction when they turned. In its current state, it is nowhere near my original goals, as it stayed like a bare-bones platformer. One of my friends playtested, and while it was complete, it wasn't fun. If I were changing it now, I would add a score and health system, plus some new types of enemies to make it more interesting. I did not consider expanding this game into Part B, let alone Assignment 3. The original intention of this game was to create an asteroid shoot-'em-up where the player could upgrade their ship to have different weapons, there were different enemy types, and the player had to overcome 3 different challenges before defeating the final boss. Once the final boss was defeated, the player could go to Endless Mode, where the asteroids would hit harder and speed up until the player was defeated. I had more experience making this game than the previous game, so implementing the workshop tasks was not too hard. However, going beyond that was more difficult, including adding a health and score system and adding a damage system. The most difficult mechanic to implement was switching to a different weapon and getting it to spawn correctly. I did learn that variable names needed to be checked, just in case there are any extra spaces like there was when I was debugging it. In its current state, the asteroid shoot-'em-up has 2 different types of weapons, enemy sizes that correlate to its damage output and health, and a score system. However, it is still a long way from my original ideas, which I have slightly adjusted since then. My friend who playtested the platformer also playtested this game, and he said it was decent overall, but some more variation was needed, which I did implement later. This game was the one I picked going further into Part B, however not for Assignment 3 as it was still too simplistic and not fleshed out enough to be considered. The original intention of this game was to create a simple top-down racing game where the player could pick up different boosts, including a shield, which allows the player to hit a car without losing a life boost which heals 1 life, and plenty of other small buffs. The cars would get faster over time, making it more difficult to avoid. By this point I had learnt a lot about GDevelop, yet despite this, the tutorial for this game was by far the most challenging. Getting the highway position right I found troublesome, and spent way too long trying to find a solution for, only to find something temporary instead. However, I quickly breezed through the rest of the tutorial and even added some extra features. This was the first game I added scaling to, and the first game where you could replenish health, so it was clear my GDevelop skills had developed greatly over the course of making the 3 games. In its current state, it was close to the ideas I had for it, albeit with less boost, but I had implemented 2 ideas I initially had, including life boost and scaling. The playtester quite enjoyed this game with only minor feedback. This game was complete enough to consider it for Part B, however I ended up choosing the asteroids because I prefer asteroids over racing games.